evening and welcome everyone. I am Hani Kithani, co-founder and COO of 10,000 Startups India, which is a platform for startups from idea through IPO stage for fundraising, virtual incubation and acceleration. It's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our guest, Mr. Pankaj Parwanda, co-founder of Ghost Stops. Ghost Stops is India's youth-oriented hostel with the most unique features, ideal for backpackers and travel enthusiasts with great facilities and hospitality. Not just this stay, they also plan multiple fun activities which will keep you busy Instagramming every experience. Hi Pankaj, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me today on this session.
Pleasure is all mine. I am very excited to have this conversation today, learn more about Ghost Talks, learn more about your journey throughout your Ghost Talk experience. I would be eager to know more about you and do tell us something that would surprise us to find out about you.
um, I think you'd be surprised to know that I'm not the most social person, whereas I run or I'm a co-founder at Ghost Stops, which is anchored around being a social hotel chain. So that would be surprising for you to know. I'm quite an introvert. I take my own time to sort of get acquainted to people and sort of get comfortable around them. So that's surprising.
Indeed, I didn't know that. I mean, that's amusing. And then how did you come up with this idea? And do tell us about you, your co-founder journey at the initial stages of your Ghost Stops.
So the business is centered or are made for a customer which is 18 to 30-year-olds. Both I and my founder Pallavi, we are way beyond that age. But we understand what young people require. Most of the young people basically travel a lot, have a very significantly higher travel appetite as compared to any other consumer group, and unfortunately there is no hotel brand that services them, even though they are one of the largest consumer group in the country. About 35% of the country's population is this youth, and almost 66% of total domestic trips taken in the country is by this consumer group. But there is no hotel brand for them, mainly because their budget is fairly limited, and the belly of the mass sort of lies at 500 rupees a night. So we sort of came across or bumped into this concept of youth hostels on a random backpacking trip to Europe in 2012. And we just said, oh, there is nothing like this in India. Why doesn't a hotel that is youth focused and social exist in India? And we didn't realize that there was this larger problem in India that had to be solved using this model. But only later, after we sort of opened our first and second hostels in Varanasi in Delhi, did we realize that the Indian youth is craving for a hotel brand that can give them standardized high quality accommodation in 500 rupees a night. And we said, oh, the youth hostel concept holds the key to giving them access to this high quality stay, which otherwise was not within their reach. And we quickly sort of adapted that global model that we had learned from, and we adapted it to the psychographics of the Indian youth, and we scaled it, and the young people loved it, and now it's a brand that's called Ghost Stops.
Amazing. I'm really curious to learn more about your background, your backpacking experience, and of course your co-founders. So if you can tell us more about you, would be really great.
Both of us, we don't belong to the hospitality industry. Pallavi, who's our founder and CEO, is an economics honors graduate and an MBA from Delhi. And she spent about 8 years of her professional career in qualitative consumer behavior research and brand consulting. So she advised brands on how consumers perceive their brands on a qualitative level, and would advise them how to position it to sort of achieve their business objectives. So she has a very keen understanding of what the consumer really wants and the trade-offs that they want to do, or what their aspirations are, and what is the gap between their aspiration versus affordability. So tapping on that gap is where Ghost Stops is centered. And given the fact that she's been passionate about hospitality forever, the departments that she handles are also in line with that, including supply growth, operations, transformation, and HR. My educational background is that I am an engineer from Manipal Institute of Technology, I spent about 8 years of my professional career in telecom infrastructure industry. Um, I started my career with Nokia and then grew to work with ZTE, Huawei, and then Ericsson, all the way from operations to technology consulting to sales. My background has been in large process-oriented technology organizations, and my aspiration was to create or scale a startup and create an impact at scale. So, given my aspirations, I handle departments that sort of make sure that we keep an eye on scalability, or are more technology oriented, or more back-end support enabled, so as to make sure that the rest of the organization can deliver great customer experience at the forefront. So I would usually handle demand, which is a lot technology focused, including sales, marketing, customer support. I would also oversee technology as a full department, and I also oversee finance and investor relations. So that's how the split of work is sort of there between Pallavi and me, and they're aligned to our strengths, our skill sets, and our passion.
Superb. That's so exciting. So do tell us, what is most important to GoStops, your organization, the mission, vision, your values of the company?
So for us, what is most important is the mission that we're on for now. Obviously, there are values that I and Pallavi sort of stand for, and that is the kind of investors that we've got on board and the employees that we've got on board. But they haven't. We were still in our early stages, and the values haven't been documented as clearly as they should be. But in terms of the mission, I think the mission is fairly clear, which is that we want young people to not have any more bad trips. So they should feel very empowered and enabled to go to any part of the country, and they should feel very confident that there is a high quality infrastructure, high quality hotel, high quality social youth hostel which exists in any part of the country, and a brand that is going to hear them, take care of them. So that is our mission. We don't want people to have any bad trips anymore, young people.
That is amazing. That will really give a confidence to young people to travel where they can rely on a particular brand in terms of their backpacking trips. So I'm sure it will be, really helpful, and I'm sure it must have been really helpful. Can you share a few case studies or any, story that you can share where you got a feedback where a young traveler mentioned about your company and how it helped them to move forward with their traveling plans?
So there have been lots of moments where we have felt very happy observing these young customers, and we see a young Pankaj or a young Pallavi in these customers, right? Because we really wish that when we were young, we had such hostels available across the country, and we could just go meet new people of our age group, make friends, and just not have to worry about how shady or dingy that hotel is going to be where I'm going to go and stay. So there have been instances. For example, I remember in 2016 when we had just started opening up our hostels to the Indian distribution channels, and we were sort of trying to learn how the Indian consumer adapts to this product. I remember there was a young person who had checked into our Delhi hostel and was staying in the common area, and I just came and sort of met him, and I asked him what sort of brought him to Delhi, or how did he discover us. And he said that one of my friends told me that there is something called a hostel that now exists in India, in Delhi. I was actually coming here to just visit the passport office, and I just had to get my passport renewed. So I just took the advice of my friend and I came and stayed here. And you know what? I can't imagine that there is something like this that exists, and I can get this kind of experience in 500 rupees. So the smile on his face and the shine in his eyes was brilliant, and the guy was just so happy. that there was a youthful sort of a young, fun, vibrant place that sort of existed for them to stay, and the possibility of this sort of extending wherever they may travel across the country. Similarly, I vividly remember a moment where there were these group of young kids, about 5-6 of them, who had traveled from NID Ahmedabad to our Go Stops in Varanasi, and they would go and explore the town, and they would come back, and these guys are young and restless, and they want to do different activities, and they can't just they're not old, they don't go back to the room and sleep. I found them in the common area, and they had brought in craft paper, and they were making windmills, colorful windmills, which they left all over the hostel. So those were very nice moments where I sort of it felt that we were really adding a lot of value and happiness to the lives of these people, and we were touching their lives. So yeah, these are some moments that I vividly remember, and I draw a lot of satisfaction from.
That is indeed an amazing, feeling when you see the satisfaction on your customer's face, and the things that they are experiencing because of you. So do tell us, because 10,000 Startups India is, all about fundraising, and we would really want to learn about your journey on fundraising for Go Stops. By the way, congratulations on your fundraising.
Thank you.
Yeah. So do tell us, when did you decide that you really need the equity investors for the funding?
So to be honest, actually, there wasn't like a clear moment where, I sort of felt that this is the right moment for equity fundraise. Actually, my continuous pursuit for equity fundraise helped us, continuously find out what was missing in, whatever discovery we had to do in terms of finding our product market fit, or our business model validation, or our GTM validation. So there wasn't like, I was the most sensible guy in the world who knew now is the time to bring in external capital and this is the time to pitch. Like any other energetic young entrepreneur, I had been pitching to investors since the beginning. And that is when investors would sort of keenly look at my business idea, and they would sort of drill further down and say, oh, you know what, there's a problem here. The business model seems very risky, and maybe you need to test this business model for a couple of years to really see which business model is going to be the winner, because you're not going to go with multiple business models. Which is the winning business model are these? What is your GTM strategy? I know you're saying that there are 1,000 possibilities, but you've got to sort of cut the wedge. So what is that one GTM strategy that you're going to go with? So I think continuously sort of engaging with investors, talking to them. I see a lot of young entrepreneurs feeling very insecure about their business idea, and they feel that, if they share their business idea with someone's going to steal them, etc., etc. Let me tell you, nothing like this exists. There are 1,000 business ideas. The real power is in the execution. There is, and investors don't have the time to steal your business idea and run it on their own. Rather, what they can do possibly is that with their experience, or even without their experience, when they sort of sit with you, or even any other person will sit with you and look at your business idea and ask you a couple of questions, those questions really make you think harder and sort of find out what, questions that you wouldn't have asked yourself. And they really help you either find answers to questions that you haven't asked yourself, or if not anything, reinforce and internalize and validate that your assumptions and your theories were true about the business, and you only become more confident about your own business idea. So I had been pitching to investors all along, but over the journey, I realized what steps had to be taken before any amount of external capital should have been brought in. And I'm glad that good sense prevailed, and we did not bring in external capital till all the experimentation was complete, till we had achieved a very clear product market fit. And I'm happy to illustrate what a product market fit is, or validate our business model, or validate our go-to market. I think these three things are very important to validate before you raise any amount of external capital, because unfortunately in India, the investor capital is not a very patient capital, or it's not a very early stage experimental capital. You don't get pre-seed capital in India. The capital that you get is seed, which is after the idea has been prototyped and a certain amount of validation from the market has come in. That's when an investor will come in, which means that there will be a lot of expectation from the investors. So quickly turn it around from a seed stage to a growth stage, and there is no one sort of mechanism for you to experiment and quickly turn out that validation. Sometimes this experimentation and validation and pivoting can take multiple years, and maybe an investor will just become very impatient at that point of time. So whenever I meet early entrepreneurs, I would tell them that if they can bootstrap till the point of experimentation, when the product market fit, the business model and the GTM is clear, they should do that. They should not raise external capital, and once this is clear, once it's about cut, copy, paste.
So true. And would you say this is applicable to all the sectors out there, and not just hospitality?
Yeah. So in terms of equity investment, or even in terms of debt investment, actually more in terms of debt investment, an investor comes in to make returns. And in India, the investors they don't have access to very patient capital. All the funds that will come in have certain horizons within which they have to return, returns to their LPs. So you must, and which means that the investment in your company is going to be time bound, right? So within 5 years or 4 years, they will expect to make a certain amount of return and exit. And what if it takes you 5 years to experiment and pivot? And ultimately what will happen is they will just ask you to give in, because they will want you to fail quickly, fast and cheap. But it's very important in the early stages to not give up and keep experimenting if you really believe in the idea that you're going after, because there is a lot of perseverance that is required in the early stages, and a lot of pivots and changes that are required in the early stages to really get to what you're going to do. If you would have asked me and Pallavi in 2014, are you trying to what is the target market you are going after, we wouldn't have been clearly able to tell you which target market we're going after, because we just opened our hostels and we were filled up by foreign backpackers that were there in so many cities. The foreign backpacker market is a very small market. It's 11 million total arrivals in the country, out of which youth arrivals must be at max half of them. So for a market of 5 million, what product would you build? Why would an investor sort of help you scale for a market of 5 million, right? That's a very small market to go after. So only after multiple iterations, multiple pivots, did we identify what problem are we going to solve for which consumer and how. So it can take a lot of time, and you can't be impatient at that point of time. That experimentation is the key. And that's when the hockey stick sort of happens. The hockey stick graph picks up right at that inflection point when you get your PMF, BM and GTM validated. And that can happen 1 year from the point of inception, 2 years from the point of inception, or 5 years from the point of inception. For us, it took us almost 5 years, from 2014 to 2017. 2017 is when we got the PMF clear, because 16-17 is when we spent time to sort of open the product up to Indian consumer and sort of see if this consumer really likes it and are they willing to pay for this particular product. After 17, when we had a product market fit, is when we got 2 people in our central team. Till then, our central team was Pankaj, Pallavi and half an accountant. And then, we onboarded 2 young folks to launch a marketing campaign, and now was the time to validate our business model. So 17 and 19, we tried multiple business models, including franchise-owned, company-operated, franchise-owned, franchise-operated, company-owned, company-operated. So 17, 19, we validated which business model is going to work for us. And only after the business model was clear, and the PMF was anyways clear in 2017. So that's when in 2019, we went out and we raised our first angel round.
Wow, that must be overwhelming. And, do tell us about how was your journey initially when you said, there was a lot of experimentation and a lot of, trial and error. So what was your first location? How did you decide on that? And how did you manage to bootstrap initially, for your startup? So do tell us about the struggles that you faced initially.
So I don't know, any entrepreneur doesn't really view it as struggles. So I would not call any moment that I have spent in this business as struggle, which is why I'm so sort of full of energy even today, and I'm really looking forward to sort of growing quickly. So there haven't been struggles, but there's been patient or interesting times when we've sort of hit roadblocks, and then we have pivoted and changed. So just like I said, when we started, we just brought a product that we saw in Europe and we said this doesn't exist in India. We didn't know what problem we were solving for which consumer, etc. And we just realized that this product, the consumer that we were attracting was the foreign backpacker, and this wasn't a market that one could scale for. And then we made the pivot and we said, okay, we are going to use the model from Europe to solve a problem for the consumer from India of this particular age group. And then we experimented and we opened this product to the Indian youth and they liked it. So now they were willing to pay a price for it, and the price elasticity was good. That is when we realized that yes, now we had a product market fit. Now the second question was, how are we going to give these youth hostels to the youth of India? Are we going to go and lease the hotels and convert hotels into hostels? Are we going to put that capital expenditure there, or are we going to ask asset owners to invest that capital expenditure in those hotels, or are we going to ask the franchisees or the asset owners to also run these hostels as per our guidance? So what is going to be the business model with which we will be able to expand and make sure that this youth hostel can be available to these young people in every nook and corner of the country? So that second was the business model. And then there was the go-to market. How and which consumer are you going after? How are you going to reach out to them? What are going to be the multiple methods through which you can educate them that there is this new category which is getting created? How can you acquire them, and how can you make sure that it is the acquisition is a capital efficient acquisition? So all of these are the steps that one takes to sort of get to.
I'm thrilled to learn about your experience, and I really love the fact that how you are such an enthusiast about your and such passionate about your business, and this is very exciting for me to understand. Can you throw some light about your pilot project, some details about your pilot project that you did for GoStops?
So the first pilot was the hostel in Varanasi. I remember that in around I think 1st of December 2013 is when we finally signed the lease deed for our hostel in Varanasi, and 24th of December or 26th of December 2013 is when we were supposed to catch a train to Varanasi, and I, Pallavi, and my sister sort of caught a train and we almost missed it and got to Varanasi, and we entered this house that was going to be a hostel or a youth hostel from there on. And there was a large building which had no one inside it. It was dirty, and we went and we mopped the floor and we bought a mattress and we slept the night in that hostel, that building, and we ate some pizzas in the morning. So those were fond moments, that sort of one remembers. And those were the starting point of opening that hostel up. And then by March of 2014 is when we were operational. So when you start, you really have no idea what you're doing, what you're building. I think you just sort of take a leap of faith and you get started, and you should be open to sort of doing almost everything when you start. We were happy to sort of clean the place up, sleep on a mattress that we had just bought around, and it was fun for us. And these are moments that we really remember very happily now. So all of these pilots, or willingness to sort of do everything that it takes to build whatever you're passionate about, I think those are the moments that you really remember and cherish.
That's amazing. And when was that one breakthrough moment that you thought that, okay, this is it, this is something that will be is successful now and will be going forward from here more and more aggressively? So what was that one moment that you found it this is it?
I'd say in 2019, when we were clear that the real need of the hour, we know that in 17 I was very clear about the product market fit, and I knew that the young people of India, which is like a large population, 370 million people, need this particular product. So that was fine, but I think we were still not able to scale because we were still validating our business model. But in 19, this model was validated that the hotel owners in the country need or the secret to delivering or creating a hospitality brand in India is to maintain great customer quality. And the only way to maintain great customer quality is to build an operating organization rather than a franchising organization. That business model validation was very important. And I think that sort of opened doors for us, and we were never able to scale at a speed that we scaled with after 2019. So because the business model was very clear, it was very easy for us that we were able to tap into the abundant unorganized hotel supply which existed in the country, and we were able to scale very quickly. So there might be a large consumer base which really wants your product and wants to pay for the product, but you also have to have a very scalable and a business model that is required from the supply end, or is appreciated from the supply end, for you to be able to quickly scale and address this problem in the market. So I think the moment in 2019 when the business model became very clear, and it became very clear that not just were we solving a large problem for the consumer, we were also solving a large problem from the supply side, is the moment when we sort of started scaling very quickly.
Superb. So that must have been really great, realization for you. And then you must have also had a lot of confidence that now also other people will be able to have confidence in you and maybe invest, and you can grow and expand this business model to another level. So do tell us about your fundraising process. Something very basic like the pitch deck of GoStops. How was it built? I mean, did you build it with your co-founder, or was it done by an expert?
No, the pitch deck was, in fact, all the way till pre-series A, we have built our own pitch decks, and I think that works the best. Because in early decks, I don't think it's most important in terms of what numbers you show or what market sizing do you do. There are enough people to do that market sizing for you. What is really important is that your vision of the story comes out, which is that you should be able to very clearly articulate that what problem are you solving and for which consumer, and how do you intend to solve this problem, and how is it different from any other method of solving this problem, and why the timing is right to be able to solve that problem. As long as that story is very clear, that's all that's required, and rest all technical jargon is really not most important, even though it's required, but it's not the most important piece of the puzzle. The most important piece of the puzzle is the story as to how you view it.
That's amazing. So did you really got your first funding round from your own pitch deck that you created? That would be really amazing to know.
Yes, and even the last $1 million round that we raised was from the pitch deck that I created. We did not have external consultants creating the pitch deck for us.
And what about the other documents? Do mention a few of the documents that were really important while you were going through the process of fundraising.
So the documents are mainly in two categories. One is the pre sort of a transaction documents, which is when you are pitching and when the investor is evaluating the opportunity. Usually the documents that are required is firstly a pitch deck or an investment material. Usually the difference between a pitch deck and an IM is that IM is more detailed and IM has more information than a pitch deck. Pitch deck may be just high level story lining. After that, I think after the investor usually understands that the story is defensible and the story is something that attracts them, then they want to look at how keenly have you planned the business going forward, and all the scaling that you've been talking about, how accurately can you sort of put it in numbers also, or plan it in the future. So then a business model is required, or a financial plan is required to quantify what is the amount of fundraise that you need, etc. And besides that, what else is required is a MIS, which is your existing MISs are required, so as to see that the assumptions that you're taking in the financial forecast, how do they tally with your historical figures of the business. And besides that, after the MIS, because MIS is a detailed sort of a variable growth lever by growth lever mapping, the last one is the audited financials, so as to validate that the MIS has to tally with the audited financials, and there is a certification from the statutory auditors to say that yes, these numbers have been verified and are correct. So I think these are the pre-transaction documents, and then there are post-transaction documents when you sort of the investor sort of makes an offer. They usually give you a term sheet and you sign it and send it back, and then you sort of get into a negotiation for a what is called an SHA and an SSA, a shareholder agreement and a share subscription agreement. So you would usually, sort of term sheet would form the basis of the kind of rights that investors would like to have, because 1 crore of investment is not equal to the same 1 crore of investment. The difference is in the rights. The color of 1 crore varies with the rights that the investor asks. So usually you get a flavor of the rights, and the rights give you a very clear vision of how the investor is envisioning investing in this business or growing this business with you. Are they going to be a hands-on investor? Are they going to be a hands-off investor? How much control do they want to exercise? So that becomes clear with the rights that are outlined in the term sheet, and then further detailed out in the SHA and the SSA. For these, you obviously bring in lawyers or counsels and company secretary and chartered accountants.
That's amazing. And I recently came across this query from one of our startups where they're confused about how to draft a term sheet. So how do we decide what kind of rights are we giving to the investors? How do you decide that, and how was it for you?
The rights don't have to be decided. I think what really has to be decided is what gets decided in the first few meetings, which is how do you want to grow this business, and how comfortable do you feel around the investor in terms of how they're going to monitor or control, or sort of exercise their direction on the management for the business. And as long as those visions are aligned and that flexibility is aligned, the rights only sort of outline that. So for example, if an investor wants a tag along right or a drag right, etc., these are standard rights and form the basic fundamentals of equity investing. Whereas if there are terms and conditions being put or rights being put where you will not be able to do proper price discovery in your later rounds, or rights where you have to report, you're obliged to report financials or performance metrics or operating metrics of the company more often than required. If someone says, hey, give me an MIS every 15 days, in an early stage startup, either you can run the startup or you can deliver an MIS every 15 days. So those give you a very clear fable of how hands-on the investor is, and how much do they trust you on running the business. So I think as long as that is clear, the term sheet just outlines that, and the lawyers can really assist you in understanding the implication of each clause. And as long as it tallies with your vision, I think you can easily take a call whether it's a yes or a no on the transaction.
What about number crunching? Like when you talk about valuation, how did you come up with your valuation, and how did you decide on how much equity you want to dilute?
I think dilution is sort of overrated. I think dilution is not important. What is most important is that the pie grows, is that the company sort of, or the rocket ship sort of takes off and crosses the critical mass and crosses across the stratosphere. So dilution is clearly overrated, and I've seen early entrepreneurs really worry about, oh, I'm going to get diluted to X%, Y%, why should I? It is really not important. What is most important is that the value of your equity share in that company should continuously keep rising and should give you commensurate returns which are more than what the investors are getting, because you're also giving away your sweat, equity. No one's going to pay you market salaries. You're going to get salaries which are less than what you would get in a job. So you should definitely keep getting returns year on year on your equity. So what is the real metric to measure, I believe, is the value of your equity. So a 2% of 1,000 crore is much more than 70% of 100 crore. So you have to continuously measure that the value of your equity has to keep raising, and just in the pursuit of maintaining very low dilution or trying to be very stingy about dilution, I have seen so many entrepreneurs who don't raise enough money and keep their company capital starved. And keeping your company capital starved is the biggest mistake you can make, because the company will never have the confidence with which it can go out in the market and acquire the opportunity. And if it is really a VC play that you're raising money for, then clearly it is a fast mover game where you must be the first mover to grab maximum mind share in that particular space or grab maximum market share in that particular space. So you really must be able to grow as fast as the market allows you to do it, or as fast as your internal machinery or the organization can mature quickly too. So capital should never stop you from growing fast, or capital should never make the organization underconfident in capturing opportunities or facing challenges that they face from a time to time. I have seen promoters undercapitalizing the company, and then suddenly, the next round is getting delayed by a month or two, and they'll be like, oh, we don't have enough runway, now let's sort of slow down, or let's reduce the number of people in the team. And then ultimately, what are you doing? You've built an organization to a particular level of maturity, to a particular scale, to grab more opportunity, and now you're again hunkering down or contracting. That's not the right way to build a business. So worrying about the dilution, I think, is good to an extent, but I think it's overrated.
This is going to be one of the best key takeaway from the session today. This is really interesting how you put it about valuation and dilution of your equity. So do tell us, how much time did it take for you to, get investors on board from the first pitch that you made?
So in terms of the first round that we raised in August 2019, that was a quick round. I think we closed that round in about 5 months, 4 to 5 months. April, May is when we started pitching, and by August we had closed the round. And then we had a follow-on round which we raised in around Jan or Feb of 2020. And then I raised another pre-series A $1 million round in April, May of 2021. I think this round, the $1 million round, unfortunately, was a long drawn process. It almost took me 8 to 9 months to conclude that particular round. But that is also because we were in the middle of COVID, and it took a much longer time for investors to sort of form their opinion. And then while they were forming their opinion, they saw another COVID wave. They saw the second COVID wave. So because of the COVID, and because of the fact that when you go to angels, usually the round sort of takes much longer than a Series A, for example. When you're going to institutional investors can make their mind up very quickly, while angels, because you also got to stagger the round in small ticket sizes, which a lot of angel investors come together and invest, you've got to convince many people. So it takes longer to conclude an angel round as compared to an institutional round. So I'd say if any promoter is raising an angel round, then they should safely keep 6 to 9 months buffer and assume that in the 9th month that cash is going to hit their bank. So they should start the process 9 months before that. And in case of an institutional round, I think you can conclude the round in 3 to 4 months, but 6 months is a good time to assume.
Amusing. Great. So do tell us, once you have onboarded your investors, what are the things that a startup should take care of after the investors are onboarded?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think a lot of promoters may think that after an investor has come on board, they don't need to worry about them, report anything to them, or the rights given to them in the shareholders agreement are just a formality, etc. But from my experience, I have maintained very frequent reporting and updates to my investors. To all my investors, even though contractually I'm obliged to send them MISs and updates on a quarterly basis, I make sure that I update them on a monthly basis. I have an automated process to send them MISs at the end of each month. We close our books and we tally our books at the end of each month, and we send those MISs to the investors. Besides that, I have also maintained WhatsApp groups with my investors, the entire investor groups that I have, and I make sure that at least on a fortnightly basis, I give them an indicative forecast of the kind of revenue growth that the company is experiencing, so that they can also feel excited about the company. The fortnightly steps or the monthly steps that I take are not required contractually, and the investors don't expect it. Even if I don't give it to them, it's not like they will complain or they will have a problem with GoStops not reporting. But they, just because I reach out to them and just because I give them these updates, almost in a spontaneous way, they end up getting engaged with Ghost Ops forcibly almost, and they end up thinking about Ghost Ops almost every day and night. And if someone sort of asks them, hey, what all startups are you invested in, the first startup they would mention is Ghost Ops. Or continuously at every point of time, they know how much revenue Ghost Ops is going to make this month, and how is the growth month on month at that point of time. So if at any point of time I really feel that we are growing faster and I need more capital, I have been able to reach out to them, and I have been able to spontaneously gather support from them and raise another round of capital. So keeping them abreast with the growth of the company is not a requirement, but an initiative that founders should do, because you need to keep them engaged in the startup. And the only way to do that is not only at the time of fundraisers. Actually, the support that you get from them at the time of fundraisers, or at the time, for example, in COVID, you may require a lot of support from your investors. You may require there may be excessive dilution happening as a result of COVID, and you need to go back to them and you need to ask them for extension of timelines for raising Series A, etc. All of those difficult conversations become much easier if you maintain a level of transparency with your investors. So it goes a long way if you can maintain very frequent updates and build relationships with your investors.
Truly insightful, how a journey after your fundraising should be and could be, to make it seamless. So amazing. So do tell us about you, Pankaj. So how does your typical day looks like, and do tell us the difference before fundraising and after fundraising.
I think before fundraising, there was a lot more operational work that my day would usually be occupied with. From pricing to marketing to vetting new technological developments that we are doing. I think I would spend most of my time doing that. After fundraise, I think the responsibility comes on the founder to make sure that there continuous access to resources, and one of them is capital. So that sort of takes up most of your time. So today we have department heads to handle head sales, to head marketing, head technology, head customer support, head all the departments. My responsibility and my time gets spent on making sure that I can forecast and plan what is going to happen to the company 6 months from now. Are we going to run out of capital 6 months from now? What is going to be the growth that we are going to achieve, or the revenue forecast 6 months from now? And at that particular growth, what kind of valuation will we get? What kind of fundraise will we require, and what kind of fundraise can we get? What kind of team size would we need at that point of time? So I think your work becomes more strategic and becomes more resource gathering and clarity driving, rather than actually doing a lot of things on your own.
What about the other things? How do you, enjoy the day? Like, what are your hobbies apart from backpacking, of course?
Yeah, so traveling, I think, is my reward, and I sort of make sure that I travel at least once a month. And besides that, I think, like I said, I'm an introvert. I love watching content on Netflix. I love sort of going out and eating or dining in. So those are my day-to-day rewards. But yeah, traveling remains my once a month or twice a month sort of reward that I make sure to reward myself, because that sort of makes sure that I have enough energy reservoir to handle all the stresses that you do as a promoter.
Amazing. So looking back, at your journey, what is that one thing that you can do over in last 3 years, or since 2019? What would you do again?
What would I do again?
If you get a chance to do it over.
So you mean do it differently or do it again?
Like, change it. If you get a chance to change something in your journey till date, what would you change?
Can't think of anything that I would change.
Amazing. So, also do tell us, what are your inspirations? Where do you get inspired from, and your creativity, and which other, CEOs and mentors do you look up to?
Hmm. What do I get inspired from? I think I get inspired from almost everything and everywhere. When I check into a great hotel room, which is beautifully designed and very well kept, I feel very inspired on how this company is able to maintain such high quality of customer satisfaction. Um, when I watch a great piece of content consistently on Netflix, I am inspired that how can they have such great data insights that they know what consumer will like. When I when my playlist on YouTube music throws me some great music that I really enjoy, I am so inspired by seeing how intelligence and machine language has so evolved that it can really understand individual personalized choice of music and can throw up such intelligent choices of music that even a person himself or herself cannot arrange. So I draw inspiration from all of these things on a day-to-day basis. In terms of the CEO that sort of inspires me, I think I quite like and I'm quite inspired by Shantanu Narayan, who is the CEO of Adobe. I think he's one of those CEOs who has a very high approval rating from his consumers, from his employees, from his investors, and the way he sort of pragmatically handled a lot of difficult sort of situations and difficult issues that has been confronting the industry and his company at large. I think they're very innovative and they're very pragmatic in way. So, for example, the way he's handled piracy issues, has been very different from how Microsoft has handled it, which would be more aggressive, whereas Adobe's way of sort of handling piracy has been very very pragmatic and very different. So I think I sort of really look up to him.
Amazing. Do tell us, is there anything that you are maybe afraid of in the future of ghost ops, or anything that you think that you should be careful before you do something about that?
Yeah. So I think the really and I usually get asked this question in investor pitches also. What is the biggest challenge do you see in you guys scaling? So my biggest fear and my biggest challenge is that is that while we scale, and we must scale fast, because this is a problem that has existed for a long time. There is a large consumer base which is waiting for a brand to sort of scale and solve this problem at large. So it's important to scale fast, but while we scale fast, we should not lose sight of great customer experience and great customer satisfaction. So that fine balance of making sure that you recruit more people, you get processes in order, you get technology in order before you scale, and to make sure that the customer doesn't get penalized as a result of your growth. I think that is the continuous challenge, and that is the continuous fear that I have. I don't want to give up either. I don't want to give up customer satisfaction, nor do I want to give up growth. So the only challenge is that we may just slip and lose one of them, and that sort of keeps us on our toes.
That is true. That is true. The fear of reducing the quality of customer satisfaction is something that a brand is always thinking about. Yes, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Hani, and hi, Pankaj. Yeah, so basically, we are a speed networking application called Grid. So users can create their businesses and share details with use of digital business cards on the application, right? So my question is, should we get into an active marketing, or should we wait for 3 downloads, like 1,000 downloads? So for more context, we are live on Play Store and testing on App Store. We have like 200 users at this moment.
I'm sorry, Sabyasachi, I'm not an expert in the industry that you're in. So I can't comment on what you should do.
Sure, I can ask a question which you might be able to answer to. If we have to look for mentors for a business like ours, like a mobile app serving freelancers and businesses, would you give us, a place where we can look for mentors, because I think that is what is needed.
I think that is something 1000 Startup does. Is that true, Honey?
Okay.
Yes, we do. We do help startups to find the right mentors, potential investors that they can onboard and get some mentorship and insights from such experts. So, Kunjpreet, can you unmute yourself to ask the question?
Yeah, hi Pankaj. It was really insightful and lots of encouragement thoughts that you shared. So, wanted to understand how do you see your competitors in next 5 years? Maybe OYO can come up with the OYO hostel thing. So, how you plan to protect that?
No, we don't need to protect that. So I am great friends with other layers in this industry, in the hostel industry, and
Okay.
I don't think we would be able to sort of create this category, create this industry at large by ourselves. So we actually need more competition to come in, to sort of join hands and educate more people and accelerate the sort of marketing of this particular category and the adoption of this particular category. So it will be great if other large players are also able to see value in what we are building and are able to enter the space. I don't think it threatens us. And like I said, that a lot of early stage entrepreneurs feel that they shouldn't share their business idea or MIS or business plan or projections. It really doesn't matter. The beauty is in the execution. And if you're confident of your execution and you're confident of what you're building, it's an open space. And more people coming is only going to make sure that the pie becomes larger.
Great. Actually, you have given a different specs to this competitor thing. Thank you for answering the question.
No, that's how it works, Kunjpreet. Actually, I am great friends with all of my competitors, and I'd be, for example, let me give you an example how they help me shape my business better. We are building a new industry for which there are no benchmarks, and most of the entrepreneurs that they're building, they're going into an uncharted territory and they're doing something which has not been created, right? So there are no historical benchmarks to benchmark yourself against. So we are supposed to deliver great returns per square feet of real estate or per square inch of real estate. Now, how do you benchmark? How does an industry like me benchmark if we are delivering great net promoter score or customer satisfaction scores or not? If we are able to get the best kind of yield per square feet or not? The only way to benchmark our performance is against our own competition. So even though today in our industry there aren't benchmarking tools available and there aren't third-party mediators available to benchmark the industry data and provide it, we as early stage entrepreneurs and competitors in our own right, we share this data while making sure that we don't breach confidentiality, so that we can benchmark our performance and know where we must improve further. So the only benchmarks for a new stage, industry, and this is what all startup entrepreneurs do, is to share data with each other, is to inspire each other to do better, is to set new and higher benchmarks for each other. So if without competition, you'd be sort of fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, right. That was really thoughtful. Thank you for answering and sharing this example. Thanks, Pankaj.
Thank you, Kunjpreet. So we have our next question from Akhand Jyoti.
Hi, Akhand.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good also, sir. Actually, I'm listening you everything what you're told. Very good and good achievement. I just feel that.
Thank you.
The basic is what I'm in the fabric business from last 26 years, and now I'm planning. Actually, I had also finalized the land in the Kotputli. In Kotputli, Jaipur, just I think you can say that 100% before from Delhi, and I'm seeking the investor. Actually, the investment is going around 600 crore rupees.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that I'm going in the industry business, and I'm having a good experience in all the industry of this fabric business. So that the selling matter and the marketing matter is very zero for me. I'm already having the around worldwide customer of 3,000 customer.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about these things? How can I reach that piece of the investor so that he can able to understand my project and ready to be investment in that?
So, Akhand, I think in the investors, for example, you're seeking a large investment. You're seeking a 600 crore investment.
So I had all 80 crore rupees in that and land and also because this is a very big amount for me that which I had already invested in the land and all.
Yeah. So these investors, firstly, the kind of investors, at least the equity investors which are available today in India, they, from my understanding, they like to invest in asset-light businesses, or capex-light businesses. Whereas the growth requirement that you have, I think it's a capex-heavy sort of a business, and it is going to be a cash-generating business, right? It's going to generate cash of its own, and it's going to fund or pay off, the debt or the payoff for the capex that you sort of instill. So for you, maybe the best kind of investment opportunity would be to reach out to banks or NBFCs and to submit a business proposal, because you just have to set up a factory, right?
I can share my profit. I can share my equity. 40% equity I will share, but I don't go to the bank and take the money of the interest.
I don't know what to say, Akhand. So you can try sort of reaching out to these investors directly on their website. They usually have, and that is how I raised my round. All Indian Angel Network, Chennai Angels, Lead Angels, Let's Venture, all of these guys on our cap table. I reached out to them through their website. And then they have a full lead generation process, a lead qualification process, and they will call you and understand what you're doing, what you're building, and you will go through the general screening process. I think that is how it works. So you should then attempt and try and see, which and try to find a good investor fit for yourself.
Okay. That's nice, sir. That's nice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pankaj. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So, shall we take our last question? Sham Sundar, you have raised your hand.
Yes.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Pankaj, one few tips to build a better culture at the office, like the organization that we want to build, right? What is your take on how do we build a culture? Like everybody progresses. I understand that paisa chahiye, sabko paisa chahiye. The guys who are working with us need money. We need money. Everybody needs money. The customer wants to be happy in the front ki उसको 10 रुपए में 100 रुपए का वैल्यूएशन मिले. People are who are working with us want to कम टाइम में ज़्यादा देकर they want to make more money. How to build this culture where everybody wins? The customer, we as the owner, and the team that is trying to work with us.
So I don't know how to build a culture, and I think it depends on the aspiration of the founder, what kind of culture you want to build also. But I'll tell you what worked for me. I wanted to establish a high performance culture in my organization. What has worked for me to set up a high performance culture is to stop micromanaging people, is to trust them, is to empower them, and is to let them make mistakes and learn from them. And make sure that you, on a time-to-time basis, even when it's not required, make sure that you spend, take the time to recognize and to celebrate the achievements that the team has made. And besides that, I think what really goes a long way in establishing a high-performance culture is to establish a very clear meritocracy, is to give very high growth. And by growth, I don't mean words of appreciation, but cash in bank. Give very high growth to people who perform, and make sure that not so good performance does not get rewarded within the organization. I think maintaining a very clear meritocracy and empowering and trusting people goes a long way. And from my experience, 99.999% of people really want to give their best and deliver their best. They just don't want to be pulled down. They want to be appreciated. They want to be celebrated. And usually, I think founders just get too busy with their day-to-day work or the pressures of fundraising, pressures of running out of resources, pressures of so many things that they forget that if you don't take that time to celebrate and recognize the achievements, the company is only going to go 1x. Whereas if you just spend that 1 hour a month to recognize all the great things the team has done, it's going to go a long way, and the company is going to deliver 10x over the next 1 month. So I think for me, setting that high performance culture, this worked.
Thank you so much for validating what we're doing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, Arun, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So myself as an Arun Maurya, and I am running my own startup, that is food startup, and have my company is Nutrox Food LLP. So basically, I am my product is nachos, which is high protein. Used a plant-based protein into it and made a high protein nachos. So we are running into the market of Mumbai, which itself have a big space to dissolve all, to have a space for a startup. I mean, and but my thing is like I had raised a small, because this is a food startup and it need a very huge investment for to survive in the competition range. So I had raised the initial angel, but after that, what should I do? Like from where we will get these investors, like finding from LinkedIn and from this network to like on a Google, like people are there. So any other mode where we can approach these investors? And one more question is like, we should like as you told me, like you made your pitch deck by yourself, the way even I am making my pitch deck, but the financial model what we make of a 5 year, that is little bit tricky, for we don't belong to the financial part. We are like myself and biotech engineer, so I am good at production and marketing, but at the finance part somewhere we lag. Like we can't tell that investor like this is a 5 year financial plan, what I made it. So can you suggest me for this?
So Arun, what you're building is very exciting. And clearly there's a lot of scope for you to, for at least the Indian consumer story is very strong. And if you're doing an innovative sort of a product which is high protein and it's Gen Z focused or millennial focused, new consumer focused, I think it's a great thing to do. To reach out to the investors, see, you don't have to worry. The investors want you more than you want the investors. You may feel that you want the investors more, but the fact is investors are investing so much in building large teams and deal flow pipelines so as to make sure that they can grab a deal like yours early. So it's very easy to reach out to investors. Angel investors usually come in angel networks, and angel networks have their own website, and usually they have a dedicated column for you to put in your deal, and it will go through a normal deal flow pipeline, and they will reach out to you and they will understand more about your business, and they don't expect the perfect most pitch from you. They know that this pitch is going to evolve, but they just want to understand how passionate you are about the idea and if there is a real story for this idea. So you don't have to go via LinkedIn, etc. I think what really works best is to go via the normal submit your pitch process. You can use Google to research what all investors invest in early stages, which is small ticket sizes, and go to their website and fill up the form. In terms of help on preparing the financial plan, one way is to sort of look out for a co-founder who comes from that background, because you will also need, if you're going to sell nachos, you are going to need a lot of sales and marketing support. You are going to need a lot of distribution expansion support. So you will need co-founders who have expertise in distribution, expertise in sales and marketing, expertise in finance. So one is to get those skill sets into your company, or the other is to work with consulting companies like 1000 Startups and let them assist you on translating your vision into a business plan and sort of going from there.
Yeah, that is. Thank you so much. It's really, and yeah, that's it. Like if anything will be there, we will sure connect with the 100.
So thank you so much, Arun. Interesting questions, and the other question was also interesting, in fact, about the culture part. And what about hiring? So I'm curious, how do you hire people, and what kind of process they go through? Is there something specific that you look at when you do your hiring process?
So hiring, hiring is not so difficult after a certain critical mass. But the first few people that you recruit, who will recruit the others, is very critical. So when you recruit the first few people, I think mostly what works is to be able to find a fine balance between the skill that they have and the cultural fit they are to the stage of your company. So it's most important. I think what I really look for is what is it that working with GoStops will give them besides the money. Why do they want to work with GoStops? As long as that is a defense, a lot of people will tell me, sir, because you're a travel startup, we will get to travel across the country. I know this job is not going to take you a lot of places. You're going to sit in an office. It's hard work. And, so as long as I can find that there is something solid that or some solid value proposition that GoStops can deliver to their daily lives, they will be very motivated, and they will want to give their best, and they will never think of leaving GoStops, because we're really adding significant value, and money obviously they will get, and as the company grows they will get that growth, but that anyone can give. But the unique value proposition which GoStops is able to give to their lives, that is our USP. So I think as long as that is there, that is a very critical part of us recruiting these people.
That is an amazing angle to think, like how we are going to add value, and then accordingly we can hire someone that way. Amazing. So is there any final takeaways that you would like to share out with the aspiring or the entrepreneurs out there?
So usually when I sort of come to these sessions and I speak to young entrepreneurs like myself, I usually like to share my enthusiasm and my excitement about being born in India and being at this time. There are so many factors that we should be thankful for on a day-to-day basis, and we should just not think about whether it's the right time to take the leap of faith, whether it's the right time to do startup. Oh, right now there is the pandemic. No, definitely we can't do startup right now. It's just crazy. The fact that we're born in a country like India, which has 1.3 billion people, is bliss enough to be born in a market where Arun can sell 1.3 billion nachos, So if you were born in Indonesia or a Malaysia, even when you brought the entire ASEAN together, all the countries in Southeast Asia, you would have an addressable population of 300 million people. So today you pick up one small problem that you want to solve for one small consumer category, and you have $100 million industry. So we are blessed to be born in a country like India with large population, with a large youth demographic, which is solidly growing, with a large percentage of urbanization and digital penetration, which is further growing, and also it is very beneficial to be born in India today rather than 50 years later when we might have been a developed country. Right now, the growth is happening. Right now, as the growth happens, as more money comes into people's pockets, there will always be a continuous gap between their rising aspirations, which is fueled by the digital penetration, versus their affordability. So continuously the consumer need or the consumer psychographic is going to keep changing, and the opportunity that exists today is going to shift to another opportunity tomorrow. So there is a large opportunity for anyone who's agile and dynamic to build a business around moving consumer behavior and consumer choices. And then there are regulatory tailwinds, and the fact that we're integrating our payment sort of infrastructure, we're integrating our citizen identification infrastructure, so many tailwinds around that. So I would say there is no better time. If you look at it on the macro level, it is just that we are so privileged to be born in a country like India at this point of time. I think we should not waste any time, and we should just go about solving any single problem that we find in our lives, and it will not be a less than $100 million opportunity, and that is large enough size to build for, to list on any stock exchange in the world. So the time is now. You should just start and build.
That is such an exciting and such a factual takeaway for all the entrepreneurs out there, that this is the time, and go ahead and start your startup today. So thank you so much, Pankaj. Such an amazing session today, very insightful and very factful, in fact. And all the entrepreneurs here, I would really say that you were really lovely audience as well. And 10,000 Startups India is there to support you, be it an idea stage startup through your IPO. We have all the services available for you where you can get some help in terms of either your documentation or your promotion or your technology. So, and of course, fundraising. Thank you so much, Pankaj, and I look forward to, visit GoStops very soon, because as I mentioned, I'm a travel enthusiast. So I would really love to experience the hostels that you have in India. And is there any plan to go global very soon?
No, I think in FY24, which means next year after Series A, is when we'll expand to Nepal and Sri Lanka, and then further to Southeast Asia. But next year, we'll definitely expand to Nepal and Sri Lanka.
Exciting. Thank you so much for your time today. Amazing session, and I really look forward to meet you again. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Hani, and thank you everyone else for patiently listening to me today.